As we're moving towards the end of this month, here are my top 5 most loved plants in my collection. Not in any particular order. First is the philodendron Varicosum. I purchased this from Trader Joe's for only $7.99, which was obviously such a steal. During the summertime of last year, I actually sold my other Varicosum just as a result of falling out of love with it at the time. But I was so happy to reintroduce another Varicosum back into my collection, especially when at this size. I've had this plant for roughly around 2 weeks now. I purchased this around Valentine's Day, and it's currently in my customized aroid mix, and it's already sprouting a new leaf. Moving on to my next favorite plant for this month is my Hoya Wilbur Graves. This was purchased from a seller on the plantcare app. It has been a long time wishlist plant for a couple of years now, actually. I'm truly in love with how the silver contrasts with the deeper shades of green. It's one of my favorite coloration combinations. I definitely want to put this Hoya onto a pointed arch trellis as soon as the foliage becomes more abundant. This one here is an absolute dream, and I'm not much of an Antherium person yet. However, this one still is a show for me. It's the Antherium Dock Block Michelle. It's really impressed me with how massive the leaves have grown, and it's bigger than the size of my hand, though I guess it's not saying much since my hands are relatively small. But I keep this Antherium at a moderate humidity level, which is roughly around 50 to 60%. It's also currently growing in my customized aroid mix without soil, like majority of my plants, to help provide as much aeration to the root system as possible. This Antherium produced its first inflow, its first inflorescent. However, unfortunately, didn't quite make it, which from my limited experience on Antheriums, the first inflorescent usually aren't successful until about the 3rd time around. But in the future, I am quite excited to pollinate this plant, especially with the characteristics of the scarlet red veination. It'll be quite an interesting project. If you watched my Etsy unboxing video, this plant was a recent addition. It's the variegated Aliccia dragon scale. It's one of my favorite overall textural plants. Every leaf has a distinct variegation, which makes this Aliccia even more beautiful. There's some albo, there's some green on green, and I just absolutely love that. Generally, I allow new plants to acclimate for a couple of weeks before rehousing them. I do believe this is my first wishlist plant of this year of 2024. And last of all is the Hoya Globulosa. I love the simplicity of this Hoya. I enjoy how simple this Hoya appears until you touch it and then you realize you've been surprised by this texture underneath the leaves, which has this furriness surface that almost feels like a blanket or an animal with hair. It's just an obvious texture. I've had this plant for quite some time, and I keep this clear container underneath to remind myself to repot it, and it just hasn't happened yet, but it will soon, and I most likely will put this in my aroid mix without any soil. I don't have any plans as of now to place this Hoya on a trellis, just taking into account of the leaf size, and I just want to see what the future looks like in terms of growth on this plant. But if I do put this onto a trellis, it'll be an arch trellis. But so far, it's just been my favorite plant for this month because I always find myself gravitating towards wanting to touch it just to feel the underside of the leaves.